Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're at. This is Dr. Diane Sanchez, and I'm going to review Selecting Human Resources, Chapter 7. First, we're going to understand selection and placement as well as the associated theory and application of the practices, discuss the steps of a typical selection process, identify 3 types of selection tests and legal concerns about their uses, contrast several types of selection interviews and some key considerations in conducting these interviews, specify how legal concerns affect background investigations of applicants and the use of medical examinations in the selection process, describe the major issues to be considered when selecting candidates for global assignments. Let's jump into selection. What is selection? It's a process of choosing individuals with the correct qualifications to fill jobs within an organization. Selection of the right people for the right jobs results in easy management of employees. Placement, fitting a person to the right job. Selection and placement activities focus on the applicant's knowledge, skills, and abilities, known as KSAs, degree to which candidates match situations experienced both on the job and in the company. We call placement a person-job fit, which is matching the knowledge, skills, and abilities of individuals with the characteristics of the jobs. Mismatch is poor pairing of an individual with that of the job characteristics. Person-organization fit is congruence between individuals and organizational factors. So what does that mean? Person-organization fit is important from a values perspective because many organizations are trying to positively link a person's principles to the values of the company. Organizations tend to favor job applicants who effectively blend into how the business is conducted. And that's why we get into, as a result, companies use attraction, selection, attrition theory, which is job candidates are attracted to and selected by firms where similar types of individuals are employed. This theory proposes that job candidates are attracted and selected by firms where there's similar types of people. Based on these ideas, it is easy to see why person-fit organizations or person-organization fit is important for long-term selection and placement strategies. If positive fit is established, organizations should have more motivated and committed employees. That is more likely to stay and perform. Other types of fit is compilational fit, occurs when several lower-level factors such as similar work group personalities or work site team prompt an increase in higher consequences, including organizational performance and productivity. Compositional fit occurs when the people involved in creating the fit are doing so at different levels of the organization. Let's go back and give an example. Your book gives an example. Positive fit and workplace characteristics experienced by waiters in a hotel restaurant will encourage them to work harder to satisfy customers, thus increasing the hotel's overall financial performance. That is an example of compilational fit. Compositional fit occurs when people involved in creating fit are doing so at different levels of the firm, i.e., what top managers do can affect perceived fit among line employees. Other factors influencing fit include spillover, which is perceptions of good or bad fit in one areas of work, spills over into beliefs about fit in other areas of the organization. And spiraling, which involves positive and negative perceptions about fit impacting other feelings, good or bad, about the workplace. Now let's talk about selection criteria. Its characteristics that a person must possess to successfully perform the work. Predictors are measurable or visible indicators of selection criteria. For example, the ability, motivation, intelligence, consciousness, appropriate risk might be selection criteria for many jobs. And here on 7.1, it gives a good example, as well as an example in your book, on the key questions we ask under selection criteria and predictors. So what constitutes good job performance on the job? That's the elements of job performance. That's quantity of work, quality of work, compatibility with others, presence at work, length of service, and flexibility. The next question is, what does it take for a person to achieve good performance? And that's a real significant question. Characteristics necessary to achieve good performance on the job is the selection criteria. So ability, motivation, intelligence, consciousness, appropriate risk for employer, appropriate performance or permanence, What can be seen or measured to predict the selection criteria? So these are predictors of selection criteria. Experience, past performance, physical skills, education, interests, salary requirements, certificates or degrees, test scores, personality measures, work references, and previous jobs. So let's talk about validity in these selection criteria or predictors. Correlation between a predictor and job performance. Most validity decisions use a correlation coefficient, index number that gives the relationship between a predictor variable and a criterion variable. Correlations range from minus 1.0 to plus 1.0, with larger absolute scores suggesting stronger relationships. Methods of establishing validity is concurrent validity, measured when an employer tests current employees and correlates the success with their performance ratings. Predictive validity is another method of establishing validity, is test results, measured when test results of applicants are compared with subsequent job performance. Job success is measured by assessing factors such as absenteeism, accidents, errors, and performance appraisals, ratings. For example, if the employee who had 1 year of experience at the time of hire demonstrates better performance than those without such experience, then the experience requirement can be considered a valid predictor of job performance. Reliability is the extent to which the predictor or test repeatedly produces the same results over time. So those two keys, validity and reliability, are important when you're selecting the selection criterion for what you're going to measure people. This is concurrent and predictive validity. It's a great chart. It talks about your current employees and applicants and the different tests that can be given. Reviewing job performance, that's your past record. Measure job performance success, give an employment test, score the test, compare results. For applicants, you can give employment test, score the test, compare results, and then hire without considering test, evaluate job performance after, and measure job performance success. And this says if correlation is significant, validity exists. Approaches for combining predictors. Multiple hurdles have to be met. A minimum cutoff is set on each predictor, and each minimum level must be passed. For example, to be hired, a candidate for a sales representative job must achieve a minimum education level, a certain score on a sales aptitude test, and a minimum score on a structured interview. That's what I've just said. Compensatory approach is scores from the individual predictors are added and combined into an overall score, thereby allowing a higher score on one predictor to offset or compensate for a lower score. So, for example, when admitting students into graduate business schools programs, a higher score on an admissions test might offset a lower undergraduate grade point average, and that can be the same when selecting candidates. Selection responsibilities. So the organization should meet the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission requirements. And that's the EEOC, who really looks at the various types of things that companies do in their hiring process. Inherent strategic implications of the staffing function is another responsibility. And approaches, how you approach recruiting. Each department screens and hires its own personnel. Initial screening done by HR professionals and the final selection made by managers. So you have to decide how your selection approaches are going to be dealt with. So the HR employment function is really kind of receiving applications, interviewing the applicants, administering tests to applicants, conducting the best background investigations, arranging for physical examinations, placing and assigning new employees, coordinating follow-up evaluations of new employees, conducting exit interviews with departing employees, maintaining appropriate records and reports. And this is the flow chart of the selection process. So an applicant is interested in a job, a pre-employment screening is done, the application form is completed, there might be a test and an interview, a background investigation is done, additional interview, maybe optional, conditional offer of job, and then medical exam, drug test, and then job placement. So the applicant first shows job interest, and most companies do a realistic job purview, which provides potential employees with an accurate introduction to a job so that they can better evaluate the employment situation. Indeed, a realistic job preview can directly identify necessary training and clarify a job role. Truth in hiring lawsuits. This occurs when recruiters exaggerate, promotional opportunities, pay, or even the company's financial position in an attempt to hire a candidate. And so it occurs when a potential employee chooses to sue a company for misrepresenting the job. The candidate may have left their old employer, and they should have been able to understand the positives and negatives of a company or of a job in the company before taking the position. Pre-employment screening. Before having applicants fill out an application, employers conduct a screening to determine if applicants meet the minimum qualifications. And this can be done electronically through an assessment screening software used to review resumes and application forms received. And a lot of that is done by understanding the individual's knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so the computer system kind of goes through the job description and then the applicant's knowledge, skills, and abilities, and it gives a match, and that match then determines whether the applicant is qualified to progress into the next process of the interview process. And then, of course, assessments, tests, and background can be done. A drug and financial screening can be done as well. So, when do you use electronic screening? Well, it's really done threefold. If there's a large volume of applicants, I mean, many large companies do it now because the days of having a recruiter go through and weed resumes just isn't really conducive to their time, and so there's great software out there. The quality of hires needs to be increased, and the system does a great job of really weeding out who has or has not the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And then there's a need to foster business relationships across various organizations. So, application forms is the basis of a pre-screening information. It gives a record of the applicant's desire to obtain a position. It provides the interview with an applicant profile. It's basic employee record for applicants who are hired, used for research on effectiveness of the selection process. So, the selection process includes all of these. Basically disclaimers that should be on your form and notices of appropriate legal protections. So employment at will indicates the right of the employer or the applicant to terminate employment at any time with or without notice or cause, where applicable by state law. Different states have different employment at will. So if you're in California or New York, Massachusetts, state law really does trump some of the federal employment at will. Reference contracts request permission to contact previous employers listed by the applicant on the application form or resume. Employment testing notifies applicants of required drug tests, pencil and paper tests, physical exams, or electronic or other tests that will be used in the employment decision. Application time limit indicates how long application forms are active, typically 6 months, and that person must reapply or reactivate their application after that period. And then information falsification conveys to an applicant that falsification of the application information can be grounds for serious reprimand or termination. So information on application form that are considered illegal by the EEOC is marital status, height, weight, number, and ages of dependents, information about spouse, date of high school application, contact in case of emergency. Date of high school graduation may let an interviewer know the age of a particular individual. The contact in the case of an emergency could lend itself to your relatives or national origin information. Of course, marital status and other information is illegal. Resumes as applications, the EEOC standard requires that an employer treat a resume as an application. Companies should be careful so not to reject overqualified or silver collar applicants. Silver collar applicants are your more tenured applicants who have a lot of knowledge, skills, and abilities and have been overlooked based on their overqualifications. Employers also must use the I-9 within 72 hours to find out if the applicant is a U.S. citizen, a registered alien or illegal alien, all determining whether they're eligible to work in the United States legally. Ability tests. Ability tests can be work sample tests, require an applicant to perform a simulated task that is a specified part of the target job. Situational judgment test measures a person's judgment in a work setting. Cognitive abilities measures an individual's thinking, memory, reasoning, verbal, and math skills. Psychomotor test measures dexterity, hand-eye coordination, arm-hand steadiness, and other factors. Physical ability test measures an individual's abilities such as strength, endurance, and muscular movement. And then there's assessment centers, exercise composed of a series of evaluation tests used for selection and development. Many of these assessment centers are used for executive level applicants. For example, when I interviewed at Boeing, I went through an assessment center that took a week long, and they tested all of my, cognitive ability, my intellectual ability, how I handled pressure in a stressful situation, how I handled the press, and there were people watching how I did things. And then once hired, they would say, Diane, you need more work in front of the press, and so we're going to send you to a media class to make sure that if you are ever interviewed by the press, that you handle it this way and this appropriate way. Another consideration is personality tests, and that's here you're seeing the big 5 personality characteristics: consciousness, openness to experience, extroversion, agreeableness, and then emotional stability. Personality tests, the types of them are the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. A very popular one is the Myers-Briggs test. Faking personality test. Some people can try to fake the personality test, but employers include questions that can be used to detect a lie score. And fake warning, employers instruct applicants that faking results is a negative hiring impression. Honesty and integrity tests, these are terrific tests. They're also validated and reliable. Testing that reduces the frequency of lying and theft on the job, communicates to the applicant the intolerance toward dishonesty. There's polygraphs, which is a mechanical device that measures a person's skin response, heart attack, and breathing rate. By the way, they are illegal for pre-employment, except in areas like fire, police, working for the government. They can use polygraphs. Controversies in selection testing, areas in selected testing that generate controversy and disagreements, is really the appropriateness of general mental ability testing. It is well established as a valid selection tool for many jobs, but since some minority groups tend to score lower on such exams, there is considerable controversy over whether such tests ought to be used. Validity of personality testing for selection. Although it has been validated, a recent article appearing in Personnel Psychology concluded that personality explains so little about actual job outcomes that we should think very carefully about using it at all for employment decisions. Selection interviewing. The purpose: to obtain additional information, to clarify information gathered throughout the selection process. And we conduct it on 2 levels. The first level is obviously getting the screening done, and then in-depth selection interview that assesses the qualifications of the applicant. Inter-rater reliability and validity. This is interviewers must be able to pick the same qualities consistently. Intra-rating reliability, consistency within one interviewers. Inter-rater reliability, consistency across different interviewers. Inter-rater reliability becomes important when each of the several interviewers is selecting employees from a pool of candidates. Employers uses team or panel interviews with multiple interviewers. Validity can vary depending on the degree of the structure that's utilized in the interview format. And here's an example. This shows in figure 7.7 is that the more structured the interview, the more valid for selection. And it gives you the different types of interviews, and less structured, less valid for selection. So what's a biographical interview? A biographical interview focuses on a chronological assessment of the candidate's past experiences. This type of interview is widely used and is often combined with other interview techniques. Overall, the process provides a sketch of past experience. Behavioral interview techniques, applicants are asked to describe how they have behaved or performed a certain task or handled a problem in the past, which may predict actions and show how applicants are best suited for the current job. An example of behavioral interview would be, tell me about a time when you initiated a project, what was the situation, what did you do, what were the results. Questions such as these can be useful because candidates must describe in detail what they have done to complete the job requirement. And by the way, behavioral interviewing is what most organizations do in combination with the biographical. Competency interview is similar to the behavioral interview, except that the questions are designed to provide the interview with a benchmark against which to measure the applicant's response. So a competency profile for a position. Competencies like, strategic thinking, teamwork, analysis. That would be examples of competency for a specific position. And then a situational interview contains questions on how the applicant might handle specific job situations. This would be considered a case study interview where it requires a job candidate to diagnose and correct organizational challenges during the interview. Situational interviews assess what the interviewee would consider to be the best option, not necessarily what they did in a similar situation. So you may walk into an interview and, like I was given a situation to read very quickly, develop my analysis, the root analysis, and how I would attack the problem and give my suggestion for how to handle the problem and the results that would transpire once the situation was resolved. So it can be very stressful, but it is also a way for people to see your thought process. And then you have a stress interview. This one is usually done in high-risk situations. For example, it might be appropriate for FBI agents or high-pressure customer complaint positions. It's not appropriate for all positions, but like I said, it could be high risk because the interviewer may decide that they don't want to work for the company because of their interview. And then a non-directive interview uses questions that are developed from answers to previous questions. So the interview asks general questions, and then it's, you know, how an applicant would describe themselves, and then the interview uses your response to shape the next question. It's really kind of difficult to use in selection decisions because, you know, you've got to stay focused on job-related issues, and you may diverge into personal characteristics of applicants. It may become very dangerous legally. So we talked about these: biographical, behavioral, the competency interview, the situational interview, and then the benefits of structured interviews. It ensures that a given interviewer has similar information on each candidate, greater consistency in the subsequent evaluation of applicants, and individual work performance can be better forecasted. Unstructured interviews we talked about, and semi-structured. Those are guided conversation and broad questions are asked and new questions arise. And I talked about the stress interview and the non-directive interview. All of these are examples of less structured interviews. So who can be the interviewers? Well, it can be individuals. It can be individuals sequentially. So, you know, you go to HR, then you go to somebody else, a technical interviewer and a cultural interviewer, or you'll have a panel interviewer where several interviewers meet with the candidate at the same time. And then you can have a team interview where the applicants are interviewed by their peer group, their team members. Effective interviewing, you plan for the interview, you control the interview, and you use effective questioning techniques. Questions to avoid are yes/no questions, obvious questions, and questions that rarely produce a true answer. And of course, always no questions that are not job related, like things like personal questions, family, health, and so forth. Effective interview questions, leading questions, and like I mentioned, illegal and inappropriate. Leading questions would be, you know, for example, how do you like working with other people? That's a leading question. Inappropriate questions, as I stated, were things about number of children and so forth. And then questions that are not job related, like I stated. You've got to stay focused on things that are job related. Listening responses to avoid. Nodding, pausing, making casual remarks, echoing, and mirroring. These really are things that interviewers should try to avoid and just remain neutral while you're interviewing. This 7.8 is examples, and it's really more legible in your book, is general questions, problem-solving questions, types of questions about motivation, questions about working with others, and integrity indicator questions. Very good questions that can be done either individually or in a structured panel interview. So, what happens with problems in the interview with snap judgments? Some interviewers decide whether an applicant is suitable within the first 2 to 4 minutes of an interview and spend the rest of the time looking for evidence to support their judgment. Negative emphasis when evaluating suitability. Unfavorable information about an applicant is often emphasized more than favorable information. Halo effect occurs when an interviewer allows a positive characteristic, such as agreeableness, to overshadow other evidence. The phrase devil's horn describes the reverse of the halo effect. This occurs when a negative characteristic, such as inappropriate dress, overshadows other traits of the applicant. Bias and stereotyping. All of us have stereotypes or biases. Interviewers favor over select people whom they believe to be like themselves on the basis of a variety of personal factors, or you have a tendency to stereotype certain individuals based on their demographics or their culture. And then cultural noise. Interviewers need to learn to recognize and handle cultural noise, which stems from what applicants believe are socially acceptable rather than what is factual. So an applicant may, tell you things you may want to hear that are, appropriate, but may not be what they're truly thinking. Okay, background investigations. This is done to look at past job records, credit history, testing records, educational certificate records, drug tests, social security numbers, sex offenders list, motor vehicle records, military records. These are all examples of background investigations. So, what's negligent hiring? Negligent hiring occurs when an employer fails to check an employee's background and the employee injures somebody on the job. A classic example was when daycares were not doing background checks on their applicants, and they would hire pedophiles, and the pedophiles would obviously hurt the children in those daycares. That's an example of negligent hiring. Negligent retention occurs when an employer becomes aware that an employee may be unfit for work but continues to employ the person and the person injures someone. So, for example, you have truck drivers who have gotten DWIs. A negligent retention would be that you've kept them driving and then unfortunately they get intoxicated and kill somebody. That is a potential negligent retention claim. Legal constraints on background investigations. You've got to obtain a signed release from the applicant giving the employer permission to conduct the investigation. You've got to ensure that those background investigations are part of business necessity. Firms that check applicants' credit records must comply with the Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is known as FERCA. It requires disclosing that a credit check is being made. You have to obtain a written consent from the person being checked, and you must furnish the applicant with a copy of the report. Companies conduct criminal background checks to avoid negligent hiring. Employers must make sure that checks are performed consistently and fairly across different employees. Medical examinations can be used to determine if the applicant has the physical and mental capabilities to perform the job. As long as you've got the essential functions of the job, ADA permits the pre-employment medical exams except for drug tests until a job has been conditionally offered. Companies that reject an individual because of a disability, that is against the law. You've got to enter into the interactive process under ADA. So if an applicant says they need an accommodation, you need to make sure that you're trying to accommodate them. Asking job applicants any question related to current or past medical history. until a conditional job offer has been made. So you cannot do that until a conditional job offer. I don't give any kind of medical exams or background checks till a conditional job offer is completed. I think it's safer that way, and my experience has been that it is better for the applicant to go through the process, and then we conduct the necessary background checks once the conditional offer has been made, and if there's an issue, then we retract the offer. Drug test accuracy of tests varies according to the type of drug test used and the quality of the lab where the test samples are sent. There is the 5-panel and the 9-panel drug testing, so you've got to determine which one you're going to use. So these are the reasons for previous employment checks. We talked about negligent hiring, verifying the individual's credentials and history, evaluate past work and future potential work, evaluate the applicant's character, prevent unethical work conduct, enhance workplace safety, and then follow state and federal regulations. So you can make the job offer on the phone. You may formalize the letter and sent to the applicant after it is given on the phone. The offer document should be reviewed by your legal counsel, and the terms and conditions of employment should be clearly identified. The selected candidate should sign an acceptance to the offer, return the signed acceptance to the employer, and then the employer should place it in the candidate's personnel file. So, global staffing issues. We've talked about expatriates, host country nationals, and third country nationals. Here's a figure on the selection factors of the global employees. You're basically trying to see if there's going to be a cultural adjustment needed, organizational requirements, what are the personal characteristics that the applicant would need, the communication skills they would need, and then, of course, personal and family concerns. Legal concerns in the selection process. Any person who is interested in a position should be considered an applicant, even if no formal posting of the job opening in question has been made. The person has not filed any sort of formal application. The person does not meet the minimum qualifications of the job. Applicant flow documentation, that is, many employers need to ask applicants to provide EEO reporting data that may be attached to the application form. That's if they're a minority, if they're a veteran, if they have a disability. That is legal because some employers do contracting work for the city, state, or federal government, and the EEOC says that applicant flow documentation is necessary. Assessment of soft skills is done by measuring emotional intelligence and individual self-awareness, self-regulation, and those are the last three. Now, the EEOC and the Office of Federal and Compliance really make sure that all of your applicants are treated the appropriate way. And so they may, if you get an EEOC charge from an applicant, they will ask about your selection process and what happened during the interview process. So it's really important that you all train your managers or train the interviewers that are conducting the interview to make sure that they are complying with everything they need and then following through with your selection process. Well, I thank you for participating in this webcast. If you have any questions, please, by all means, put it out on the discussion board. I greatly appreciate your attendance.